Polish citizens who were in Israel when the war broke out will be evacuated under a few conditions. They must not have Israeli citizenship and they must be visiting Israel temporarily. I found out at 7 a.m. that we were leaving and where we were going. Yesterday I called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and they treated me very badly. They were very rude towards me. They did not give me any information. They told me to contact the embassy. Not a word of support, not a word of encouragement. I agree. I'm appalled by the embassy, which on the first day after the war broke out simply told us to fend for ourselves. The first report to the evacuation of Poles from Israel, which was under fire from Iran, appeared on Sunday. The Polish consul in Bethlehem expressed his willingness to organise such an operation. However, it was to be prepared on a commercial basis, and everyone would have to pay themselves to leave the war-torn country. Only after a wave of criticism did the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs announce a plan. First of all, I would like to confirm that evacuation procedures are underway, and to begin with, I would like to say that the evacuation is attracting much less interest than media reports would suggest. Based on the number of Poles registered, we have decided to use 2 aircraft. And just as the Deputy Minister announced the evacuation measures, the first Poles returned to their country. 15 Polish employees of the Polish embassy in Tel Aviv were taken from the conflict zone by Slovakian aircraft. There were 73 repatriates on the flight, 30 Slovaks, 25 of whom were tourists, and 5 employees of our embassy. The rest were citizens of Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovenia, Austria, Estonia, Spain and Malaysia who asked for our help. The failure of evacuations has drawn criticism from the Polish opposition, who were in power during Hamas's attack on Israel in October 2023 and organised the subsequent evacuations of Polish citizens. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has basic evacuation plans ready. These plans are prepared for countries that are particularly vulnerable, such as Israel, Lebanon or Iran. In 2023, after the Hamas attack, we pulled this plan out of the drawer. Of course, it had to be adapted to the circumstances, but it's not like we had to draw everything from scratch. Today's government is acting as if they were blindsided. During the Hamas attack on Israel on 7th of October 2023, aid was already on its way on day 2. But will Donald Tusk's government also manage to evacuate Polish citizens? If someone went there, essentially they did so at their own risk. Poles seeking to evacuate from Israel should, despite the minister's advice, contact the Polish consulates in Israel and demand help.
According to unofficial information, last night, Iranian missiles struck the Israeli military intelligence headquarters. Israeli censorship has banned the publication of any information about the losses. Israel once again carried out airstrikes on Tehran, in which, reportedly, Senior General Ali Shamdani was killed. Footage of the Israeli army's attack on the Iranian television headquarters has gone viral. But it was another strike during that raid that was of key importance. The commander-in-chief of the Iranian army was killed in the attack. He had been appointed to the position just 4 days earlier. He was eliminated at the headquarters of the Iranian regime in the heart of Tehran. Shamdani was the chief of staff of the Iranian regime's armed forces and the closest confidant of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. He was appointed to this position to replace the previous chief of staff, Alam Rashid, whom we also killed in the first strike of the operation. Yesterday, Iran announced a powerful strike against Israel, which ended up consisting of under 30 missiles, the vast majority of which were intercepted by Israeli air defense. At least one was reported to have hit an Israeli intelligence facility, but no information on casualties was provided. I warn the Iranian dictator against committing further war crimes and firing rockets at Israeli citizens. He should remember what happened to the dictator in a country neighboring Iran who took this path against the state of Israel. We will continue to act against regime and military targets in Tehran, just as we did against the broadcasting authority engaged in propaganda and incitement. Mentioning the fate of Saddam Hussein is not accidental. Israel is aiming to overthrow the Ayatollah regime. The elimination of the top echelons of Iran's political apparatus is intended to cause panic within the regime. For now, however, the effect seems to be the opposite. And at least officially, Iranian authorities assure that they have the upper hand against Israel. The Zionist enemy based on the experience of the last 75 years, taking into account various military and non-military reasons, and various aspects, from a strategic perspective, has no possibility of enduring a long war, which is why the regime and this Zionist enemy will be defeated in the continuation of this war. Except Israel is not alone. Some analysts believe that the United States of America may be preparing to join in offensive actions against Iran. In recent days, a significant number of American flying tankers have been transferred from America to Europe. A strike group with an American aircraft carrier is also heading toward the Middle East. According to the latest reports, American multi-role fighter jets are also being transferred near the conflict zone.
Great people, they know how to protect themselves.
And when you say better, what's
we'll come down so hard if they do anything to our people. We'll come down so hard that the gloves are off so beautifully. Now, I think they know not to touch our troops.
This was a warning to Tehran, which had threatened attacks on U.S. bases in the Middle East. After just a few hours, Trump urgently left the G7 meeting in Canada and returned to the White House. On the way, he reportedly instructed his staff to convene an emergency meeting in the Situation Room. The decision for the United States' involvement in the war may already have been made.
The Centre for Development Strategies has published a report that challenges the popular belief that renewable energy sources will lower our electricity bills. In reality, the costs of the green transition and high taxes imposed by the European Union are causing bills for consumers to rise steadily. Will the government finally start to really defend the interests of Polish families before the bills become unbearable? According to the Development Strategy Centre, in countries such as Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands, the drop in electricity prices on the stock exchange does not translate into lower bills for consumers. Electricity bills across Europe are skyrocketing, and this is due to this stupid ideological policy based on ideological premises. Eco-ideology seems to have blinded the Eurocrats, who are rapidly pushing through the green transition and burdening citizens with bills that exceed their own enthusiasm. Electricity bills are not falling but rising, because if we look at the Polish energy mix in particular, today it is mainly based on sources that were created 20, 30 or 40 years ago. Their amortization period is long gone. The European Union is eagerly pushing for a green energy transition, but the European energy infrastructure is not adapted to such radical changes, and its modernization entails enormous costs. The situation in Poland is particularly difficult. Our energy production profile has changed because, for example, we have photovoltaics, and people are simply letting in large amounts of energy that were not previously anticipated. These networks were not designed to receive energy, only to supply it, which is why distribution companies today have to invest in modernizing the network, which then translates into distribution bills. Electricity prices from renewable sources are also influenced by basic economic laws such as the principle of supply and demand. When, for example, there is no sun, it is evening. Everyone wants electricity, but also, for example, when the wind is not very strong, then demand is very high while supply is very low, which causes a significant increase in price. The European Union, pushing for an acceleration of the energy transition, imposes drastic taxes on member states for CO2 emissions. In Europe, they pay, but Poles pay especially because our energy sector is mainly based on those resources that are most heavily taxed. It was designed this way so that Poles would bear the highest costs of this crazy ideological revolution. For years, Poland has been forced by EU institutions to move away from its national wealth, coal, and this increases our bills and limits our competitiveness. We are giving up coal energy too quickly. Even my region, the Konin-Turek region, is a good example of this. The lignite deposits, for example, at the Turek lignite mine have not been fully exploited. The power plants have been decommissioned and the mines have been closed. The transition is based mainly on unstable renewable energy sources such as solar and wind. Creating a responsible energy mix requires a change in approach. There are also stable renewable energy sources such as geothermal energy and hydroelectric power plants, but also biomass energy, i.e. wood pellets and briquettes, which are used to heat homes. The European Union is consistently introducing green eco-ideology regardless of the rising costs for societies and the economies of member states, which are steadily losing their competitiveness. The Polish government is enthusiastically implementing these assumptions without taking into account how much they burden the budgets of Polish families. It seems that for Donald Tusk's government, smiles, recognition and kind words from EU leaders are more important than ensuring the security and financial stability of its citizens.
A meeting of the leaders of the G7 summit, representing the countries with the most developed economies. These are important talks, but there is a lot going on in the world, which is why Donald Trump had to cut his visit short and return urgently to Washington, D.C.
I have to be back. Very important. I want to just thank our great host. He did a fantastic job. Thank you in Canada. But you probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can. I'm going to have dinner with these wonderful leaders, and then I get on the plane. I have to be back early.
The American leader left, and French President Emmanuel Macron, as is his custom, decided to step forward and explain to reporters the reason for Trump's departure.
Écoutez, c'est ce que je...
Listen to what I'm saying. Listen, he left because he is preparing a ceasefire offer in the Middle East, which is a good thing. We'll see what the parties to the conflict say about it.
Et d'enclencher justement des discussions.
But the French president's revelations can be dismissed as fairy tales, as Donald Trump wrote on board Air Force One. Publicity-seeking President Emmanuel Macron of France mistakenly said that I left the G7 summit in Canada to go back to D.C. to work on a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Wrong. He has no idea why I am now on my way to Washington. But it certainly has nothing to do with a ceasefire. Much bigger than that. Whether purposely or not, Emmanuel always gets it wrong. Stay tuned. This is not the first retort the French leader has had to take. At the end of May, his wife Brigitte dealt him a pretty accurate blow, which Emmanuel Macron tried to turn into a joke, but he wasn't laughing. From the very beginning, he wanted to go down in French history. He wanted to leave his mark, but so far, he hasn't succeeded. And unfortunately, this incident with his wife was the culmination of that. Emmanuel Macron considers himself one of the most important leaders in the world, but Donald Trump showed him his place. During a conversation in the Oval Office, Trump pointed out to Macron that he does not understand how to end the war in Ukraine. This situation showed that the French president is quite far from the Oval Office, quite far from Donald Trump. The interests of France and the interests of the United States are diverging greatly. They have been diverging for many, many years. But Macron also has ideas that are very dangerous for Europe. Together with the new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he is trying to push American soldiers and American companies out of the continent without offering any alternative for the security of the inhabitants of, for example, the eastern flank. And all this at a time when France is struggling with enormous crises. The illegal immigrants brought in by Macron have turned the lives of the inhabitants of Paris and other French cities into hell. A report was recently published stating that there are already 100,000 Afghans in France. These are mainly young men, and they are much more likely to commit crimes. All reports point to a deteriorating security situation in France related to migration. The French are also protesting against Macron's social policies, with concerns about rising unemployment and a faltering economy. There are also concerns about the unlawful crackdown on political opponents after the Supreme Court blocked the candidacy of the increasingly powerful Marine Le Pen for president. Macron is not in control of what is happening in the country. And that's not the only problem facing the French president.